Sometimes it's hard to see what's right in front of us. That's the thought that crossed my mind when I was reading this morning in Mark chapter 6 about Jesus walking on the water. It's such an interesting passage in Mark because you see Jesus in an isolated place. He is solitary up on a mountainside in prayer. And then it says later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, verse 47, and it says Jesus was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. We're going to come back to that. He was about to pass them by. I've always thought that was such a strange detail. I mean, what is that? It's like Jesus sees them straining at the oars, and he then goes and walks on the water, which is a pretty cool trick. And then he's just going to walk by them? Is he mocking them? Is he passing by like, good luck with that one, guys. Hope you make it out alive. Like, why that detail? Why is it that Mark emphasizes not only that Jesus was walking on the lake, but that he was about to pass them by? Sometimes it's hard to see what is right in front of us. We can just simply miss it. I mean, verse 49, that's exactly what happens to the disciples. Verse 49, but when they saw him walking on the lake, notice Mark's emphasis again, they thought he was a ghost. Here's Jesus walking on the water, about to pass them by. The disciples see them and they don't recognize him. Instead, they think he was a ghost. A ghost would have been some sort of negative omen. Maybe a somewhat of a sign indicating that they were about to experience tragedy. And so it says, they cried out because they all saw him and were afraid. Immediately, he spoke to them and said, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Now, there are three elements in this passage that helps clarify our sight, that gives us eyes to see what is right in front of us that sometimes, oftentimes, we simply overlook. This passage, while it is an astounding miracle, it is not a miracle for the sake of merely showing a cool trick. No, it's actually a claim of identity. It's a claim of identity that Jesus is making through these actions in Mark's recording of it. As a matter of fact, Job chapter 9 is a passage that really helps understand what Mark is saying. What helps understand what Mark is actually putting right in front of the reader. Job chapter 9, this is after Job's friends have come, after the disasters have happened, and Job's friends come and they're trying to give him advice, which turns out to be terrible in multiple ways. Job 9 shows Job replying to his friends. It says, verse 2, indeed, I know that this is true, but how can mere mortals prove their innocence before God? This question of innocence before God is something that Job uses to launch into this incredible doxology, this worshipful depiction of God. It says, verse 3, though they wished to dispute with him, they could not answer him one time out of 1,000. He's so much further than what we can think. Verse 4, his wisdom is profound. His power is vast. Who has resisted him and come out unscathed? He is the Almighty. He is the Omniscient. Verse 5, he moves mountains without their knowing it, and overturns them in his anger. He shakes the earth from its place and makes its pillars tremble. He speaks to the sun and it does not shine. He seals off the light of the stars. Then listen to verse 8. He alone, speaking of God, stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea and walks on the ways of the sea. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament says, and walks on the sea as one walks on the land. You see, Job 9 is a backdrop for Mark chapter 6. But Job 9 is describing God, his power, his sovereignty. Keep reading. He is the maker of the Bear and Orion, the constellations, the stars, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the south. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. Now listen to verse 11. When he passes me by, I cannot see him. When he goes by, I cannot perceive him. You see, Job chapter 9 is this worshipful moment where even though Job is not able to see what is right in front of him, the movements of God in his life, he still has faith that God is sovereign, that his wisdom is beyond what he can understand. And ultimately, this admission of God's sovereignty puts you in a posture of worship. Now go back to Mark 6. Jesus is walking on the lake, verse 48, walking on the waves of the sea the way that one walks on the land. And then it says he was about to pass them by. Why am I so struck by those two elements? Because in Job chapter 9, those same two elements were used to describe God. You see, Mark chapter 6 is not some cool trick. It's a claim to deity. It is Jesus being depicted as God himself, which is the reason why verse 50 makes so much sense. Immediately, Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." The Greek for "it is I" right there is ego eimi, which means I am. And in the mind of the Jew, ego eimi was the name of God that was mentioned in Exodus chapter 3, where Moses is asked by the voice from the burning bush to go and to set Pharaoh, to tell Pharaoh to set my people free. But Moses couldn't see what was right in front of him. Moses argues with God and eventually says, "So what is the name that I might tell Pharaoh that is the name of the God that has commissioned me to set his people free?" The answer, I am, or in Greek, ego eimi. You see, oftentimes in our life, we have a hard time seeing what is right in front of us. For God will be moving, maybe even passing by, and we will mistake him for a ghost or something worse. My challenge for you this week is this. Slow down. Reflect on the Word of God and ask him to open your eyes to his movements in your midst that is right before your face that oftentimes we simply can't see. I love you guys. Talk to you next week.